Hey there, Neighborhood Church. My name is Jordan. Thanks so much for checking out this week's Midweek Devotional. Hey, this month, we've been in a series called Control Freak, and we've been exploring how our desire for power and control can absolutely wreck our relationships and really just ruin our lives. Now, I've been thinking a lot during this series, and I've been realizing that control freaks are driven by fear. If someone is chronically controlling, that's not actually the core issue. In fact, it's just a symptom of what's actually going on below the surface. Grasping for control, that is a defense mechanism. Our issues with power and control are rooted in fear. So if you're watching this today and you're a control freak in recovery, one helpful question to ask yourself is this: what am I afraid of? Have you ever asked yourself that question before? I mean, honestly and authentically. I'm not talking about your fear of spiders or clowns at the circus or things that go bump in the night. Yes, we all know those things are scary, but I'm talking about real, deep-rooted, core fears. I'm talking about the type of fears that are rooted in actual life trauma. Fears that sound like this: I'm scared that if I'm not perfect, I won't be loved. I'm terrified that I'll always be alone. I'm so scared that God is going to reject me. These are those big, hairy, scary fears that are lurking below the surface in the darkest corners of our hearts. So, what are you afraid of? Well, sometimes one of the best things we can do to overcome our fears is to simply admit them. Name your fears. Name them to yourself, name them to God, name them to a loved one or a close family member or maybe a counselor or a therapist, whoever that safe person is. Name your fear. Now, this simple act of surrender is actually a fantastic first step away from a toxic lifestyle of controlling behavior. Because here's the thing: if we ignore our fears, they'll kind of just be like a pebble stuck in the bottom of our shoe, right? Has that ever happened to you before? You're just walking along and all of a sudden you realize you've been walking around with a limp because you didn't realize there's a rock or a stick or a thorn jabbing your foot inside of your shoe. I think it's the same with our fears. If we're not aware of our deepest, darkest fears, much like a rock in our shoe, it's going to start affecting our gait and posture. And instead of a posture of openness and love, we'll be closed off and paranoid and trying to control everything and everyone around us. Friends, our issues with power and control are always rooted in fear. One of the earliest Christian leaders, a guy named Paul, once wrote this in a letter to his apprentice Timothy: "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." When we follow Jesus and we invite God's Spirit to live within us and work within us, we no longer have to be driven by our fears. And sure, our fears don't just disappear overnight. This life will always have real concerns, but in Jesus, our fears are kept in line. They're kept in place. In Jesus, we can acknowledge our fears without letting them consume us. As we walk in His love, we grow in confidence and in self-discipline, and we no longer need to try and control everything or everybody. Instead, we live a lifestyle characterized by the same qualities Jesus carried: grace, humility, and surrender. So that's our big takeaway for the day. Our issues with power and control are rooted in fear. So friends, if throughout this series you've had a bit of a heart check, if this series has been a reality check for you and you're saying, yep, you know what, I'm struggling a bit with control issues, I want you to be bold this week and ask yourself that question: what am I afraid of? What is that core fear I've allowed to steer the ship of my life? What anxieties are causing me to be such a control freak? Acknowledge those fears, process those fears, work through those fears, and ultimately surrender those fears as you follow Jesus. Hey Neighborhood, thanks so much for hanging out today for our devotional. As always, you can continue the conversation at ncvisalia.com/discuss. Other than that, we can't wait to see you this Sunday.